Welcome to the Streich Lecture. Most of you know me, but I'm Jeff Stambaugh. I'm currently the Dean of the Diller College. And before we get into the key point of the event, obviously this has been a very difficult week at MidWestern State with the tragic passing of our beloved colleague, Dr. Yoshi Fukusawa. Many of you have asked me about the funeral arrangements. His funeral will be at 3:30 Saturday afternoon at the First United Church in downtown Wichita Falls. So 3:30 at the First United Methodist Church if you wish to go to the funeral for Dr. Fukusawa. But we wanted to create a keepsake for his family where you could express your love for Dr. Fukusawa. So not twisting anybody's arm, if you knew Dr. Fukusawa and you felt about him like we do, then we have a photo in the atrium immediately outside the room where there's a pen and you can sign a brief message to his family, and then we'll frame that and give that to the Fukusawa family. So thank you for those of you that knew him and loved him for adding that, because I can guarantee you that will be a prized possession to that family for as long as they live. So we are capping off our International Week with the Streich Lecture. I would say we saved the best for last, but that might get me in trouble with some of the people in the room. So let's just say we've saved something really incredible for last. Now, scanning around, I don't see her, but I'm going to embarrass her anyway. Is Miss Patty Redder in the room?
Right outside.
She's right outside. Right outside. Patty, you can't hear me, but thank you for everything you've done to make International Week work. And I also want to thank my colleague, Dr. Niyati Kataria, who was not instrumental, the one and only reason that we were able to attract Mr. Fernandez to come and speak at this event. And so now let me turn our focus to our guest speaker, Mr. Damian Fernandez. This guy's a bit of a unicorn. How many people do you know with a master's degree in software engineering and a master's of business administration from MIT? Quite an interesting and powerful combination. And that would perhaps suggest why he has excelled for companies that you may have heard of like Dell, AT&T, Omnicom, and now he is with the Fossil Group. It's also why the American Marketing Association gave him an award as the Marketing Researcher of the Year a few years ago, and why the Fossil Group attracted him, stole him away from those other companies to come and lead their global analytics division. So he is one of those folks that's at the intersection of technology and business, trying to turn businesses from not just relying on gut instinct, but also a way to get a view of the future based on artificial intelligence and the analytics of big data. So I don't know about you, that's the topic for his address. I am fascinated to hear this. And Dr. Katari asked me to put in a pitch. See these lovely house gifts down here? They will be presented to the students that ask the most insightful questions after his address. So your challenge is before you. Mr. Damian Fernandez, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for hosting me today. Is the microphone working? All right? Can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. I was told that I need to start the lecture by saying something like, "Go Mustangs." Is that all right? Okay, perfect. Today I wanted to talk to you about two trends and how the collision of those two trends is changing the world that we live in. And I want to relate those things in what's the consequence for your life, from a personal, from a professional, from a business perspective, and also from a public policy perspective. So the first, I'm all wired up, as you know this. The first trend that I want to talk about is the explosion of data. And in essence, what you see there is the estimate by 2025, we'll have 163 zettabytes of data. Just to give you a sense of what that means, if we were to put all that data into DVDs, we can go back and forth from the moon 100 million times. So it's a lot of data. But then you can ask me, Damian, like, seriously, who cares? It's a lot of data. Like, why is that relevant, right? And the reason why this is relevant is the source of the data. So as you could see, the primary sources of data that we're having now are not so much about personal computers, but rather anything that you can connect to. And this is giving us a breadth of information that we hadn't had before. And in particular, we have a lot more information that is life critical. And we have a lot more information that is on demand, so the typical definition of big data. The key here is that everything is becoming trackable and is becoming connected. So right now, as I mentioned before, we have GPS, cameras, sensors, microphones, and so on, and all those sources of information are capturing data, and this is particularly relevant. The second trend that I want to talk about is about the smarter algorithms. In a sense, we have always had some sort of automation for algorithms, but the key here is that they're becoming much, much smarter. And what you have over there is a brief list of some of the key games and some of the key situations in which right now algorithms are better than humans. So in 1997, it was the first time that one of the chess grandmasters was defeated by a computer. The last year, the same thing happened with Go. That is a Chinese game, millenary game that is really, really complicated. More importantly, right now we have seen plenty of research that points in the direction that algorithms are better than humans in identifying disease, in seeing, doing X-ray diagnosis, even predicting human behavior. So I'll tell you a little bit of a small anecdote so you get a sense on why this is relevant. When I was 13 years old, I read my first book about artificial intelligence. Yes, I was a little bit of a precocious kid, that is true. And in that book, which was The Society of Mind, Marvin Minsky expressed all the theory behind how to build a, oh, that's nice. How to build.
The actor leaned on a light switch, so.
Very romantic. I guess we are in Valentine's week, so. As I mentioned before, 30 years ago, I was reading this. And we had great promise around artificial intelligence, but the reality is that artificial intelligence wasn't very intelligent, to put it mildly. It was a little dumb. It wasn't very useful at all. But right now, over the last few years, we have faced situations where things that we never thought that we could automate, we finally are able to do it. In a book in 2004, one of the leading researchers about this topic articulated why we would never, ever be able to automate driving a car. Well, right now, you can just walk to a dealership and buy one that has self-driving capabilities. So in a span of a few years, we went from there's no way that we can do this to you can buy it on the street, on the dealership right now. And so that you understand the complexities of that particular topic, the self-driving is a really, really complicated problem to solve because you have to have awareness of the car, awareness of the other cars, all sorts of complex situations are happening, and it has to happen in real time. And you cannot make a mistake, otherwise people die. So that's a problem that we solved a few years ago. And another good example that points into this direction is facial recognition. Up until relatively recently, we thought that we would never be able to have a facial recognition system to be better than humans. And what I have over there on that particular slide is it's a challenge that was done in 2017, the last year, by the government, in which they were trying to, they actually had 3 sub-challenges. So they had a verification accuracy, and then they have a speed and identification accuracy challenge. And in particular, these are very difficult tasks that normally, up until very recently, humans were far better at doing this than algorithms. And what you see there in the next slide, that curve over there, it's hard to read, but the one that is the lower one is the error rate of the level of accuracy that the algorithm that won the competition the last year had. And the reason why YARPA is doing this is primarily because they want to build a better algorithm themselves that can bring down the accuracy to 0.00001% of mistakes. And the reason why this is relevant is because with this level of accuracy, a lot of things can happen. In particular, the algorithm that won this competition is an algorithm that is already in place to look at on-demand video feeds from airports and from other sources and identify criminals on the fly. So a fairly interesting application. As I mentioned before, these 2 trends, the trend around smarter algorithms and the trend around big data or ubiquitous data, are converging at the same time into what I call the intelligence revolution. And the reason why I call it that way is because I believe that fundamentally we're at the cusp of a situation where we're going to see huge increases in productivity. We're going to see huge increases of productivity coming from automating mental work. The same way that the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, was able to automate muscular work and physical work, this revolution right now is at the cusp of being able to automate mental work. And that has a lot of implications. Just so I get a sense of where you guys are at, raise hands who thinks that this dynamic has no impact whatsoever in your life. Okay, no, but raise your hands who thinks that it will have a moderate impact on your life? Okay, a few. And then who thinks that it will have a profound impact on your life? All right, perfect. So I guess that we're all in agreement that this is a fairly important dynamic. And as a consequence of this dynamic, there are 2 things that are happening right now. One is we're putting the intelligence in artificial intelligence. As I mentioned before, up to very recently, what we had in terms of artificial intelligence was not very intelligent. So right now we're getting to a point where it's truly, truly remarkable the type of things that we can do. And on the other hand, because we have ubiquitous data, we have tracking data, we're able to understand a lot better than before about ourselves and about our social systems. And the reason why this is particularly relevant is, in the words of a professor of mine, we're putting the science in social science. Because it was a lot harder to do social science because you couldn't do control experiments in social science, or there was a lot of limitations around sample size and so on. In this particular case, because right now we can track pretty much everything that is going on, we can do live experiments, we can do reality mining. And in particular, these 2 dynamics converge in the sense that we can use them to improve our lives. The fact that we have better and more robust artificial intelligence means that we can automate mental work, and thus we can increase productivity and improve our lives. And at the same time, because we're gaining a lot more understanding around the impact about ourselves and about our social systems, if we can create a model of human behavior, we can create better social systems, and thus we can also increase our lives. So let me ask you another question. Who thinks that all this dynamic will have an impact on jobs in general? All right, perfect, quite a bit. Who thinks that this dynamic is going to have an impact on your job? Okay, quite a bit. This is a very smart audience. Normally when I ask this question, a lot more people say that there is going to be an impact in general, but nobody recognizes that the impact is going to affect them in particular. And the key here is that there's going to be jobs gained and jobs lost. And before you light up the torches and go down to the math and computer science department, let me tell you that this dynamic is going to be profoundly beneficial. So this is not going to be purely around job loss or anything like that, but there will be a lot of job creation associated with it. And throughout the rest of the lecture, I'll try to give you a hint on what my recommendations would be in terms of what your right professional play should be to account for this dynamic. So what you see there on that chart, it's on the Human Development Index. This was developed by an economist on United Nations Development Program a while back. And what you see is that right around the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, you see a huge spike. This spike is really positive. This means that we left behind, we increased dramatically our quality of life. And what I would argue today with you is that I believe that we're about to see a steep shift similar to this over the next few years. One of the things to note from a personal perspective is that there's going to be a premium on empathy. There's going to be a premium on leadership capabilities. We're going to have to relearn how to learn, because if you think about it, in many cases in our current educational system, we're not teaching people to learn. We're teaching facts. And the premium going forward is going to be more around, can you ask the right questions? Can you identify what is the right problem to look at? There's going to be also a premium around building relationships. And in a sense, we're going to have to redefine our source of value. I have good news for you. This is a liberal arts university. The expectation that we see is that the skills that are learned in this type of school are very relevant going forward. So this is not only that only people that are in math or computer science will make a living, but we would see more and more the importance of soft skills. The reality is that the intersection of soft and hard skill is probably the place where we're going to see the biggest premium that the market is going to pay. So what should you do with all of this situation in terms of professional interest, right? So one thing that you could do is you could work in creating algorithms. If you so choose to, you can get into computer science and apply mathematics and work on that side. More importantly, you can utilize algorithms and artificial intelligence to augment your performance and augment your productivity. I think that this is the most important dynamic. Not that many people is going to be into coding or applied math, as I am, for example. But a lot of people can utilize this type of services to augment their work. And surprisingly enough, even though we didn't think in that way before, we see even right now that creative work would also be affected by this dynamic. So even in the cases where it's like highly creative work, you could potentially use one of these algorithms and one of these services to augment your work and to make it better and faster and so on. The other thing that you could do is you could potentially focus on jobs that are harder to automate. There are a few books that have been in the market over the last few years that have tried to identify what are those jobs that are harder to automate. Unfortunately, they've been consistently wrong. And the reason why is because we see this slow development of technology and then like a stick shift change. But there are a few things that we believe are still going to be relevant in the future that will command a premium. So things that we don't believe are going to be able to be automated. Empathy, leadership, teamwork, all those type of skill sets are valued now and will still be valued in the future. So anything that you can do around building your social skills, I believe that you command a premium on that. And in essence, what we see is that anything that is around helping build a human connection will actually be very relevant, right? One thing that algorithms are really bad at is precisely those things. Let me talk to you about a specific example on the combination of human and machine. Does anybody know what's freestyle chess? No? Well, this has nothing to do with the Winter Olympics and snowboarding. Freestyle chess is a competition of chess in which you don't have just one person fighting one person, but you have teams of people or teams of people plus computers fighting another one. And the interesting thing that we have learned is that after that shock, when Kasparov was defeated in 1997, we thought, okay, so what are we going to do with this situation right now? And the interesting thing is that freestyle chess performance, what it's showing is that the combination of humans and machines at the same time defeats any machine by itself. So what I mean by that is that if you go back to the prior, slide, if this works. Here we go. So what I mean by this is that combination of using the algorithms to augment your performance is precisely that situation. More interestingly, what we have seen in the competitions is there's plenty of situations where we have a chess grandmaster and a supercomputer versus a team of like a couple of like amateur chess players with like 2 or 3 laptops, and they beat the grandmaster. So what's the key here? The key difference is that they had a process in place where they knew what were their strengths, what were the algorithm strengths, and they were combining those two things in the most appropriate and efficient way. So you see a situation where you have a hope. You could potentially win a chess tournament. You don't need to be a genius chess player. You just need to have the right process and the right augmentation with help from the machine. Another thing that I want to mention is that this is not just applicable to chess, even though that's kind of like a cute example, but also plenty of the companies that we associate with, high-tech companies that we associate with automation and with computers and so on, they're already utilizing this combination of humans and algorithms. Siri, the voice recognition system from Apple, IBM Watson, Google, the search algorithm from Google, the Twitter algorithms, all of those things right now, there's tons of people, real human beings, working to help out. So it's not just simply that we are able to automate, but there's a lot of work behind it. Another thing that I want to mention is some of the business implications around this. So one business implication is that you could potentially utilize this type of automation to reduce costs and increase speed. Another interesting dynamic is that, as I mentioned before, you can take this type of help and augment the productivity of a team or a company. But there's still a premium on focusing on the human connection and experiment and tracking. And one thing that I want to mention, I work for a fashion company, so I thought that this example was close to my heart. Have you heard of Stitch Fix? Yes? Yes. So the pitch from Stitch Fix is that you get a personal stylist, emphasis on the personal part. And it's true, you get a personal stylist. There's actually 3,500 stylists working for Stitch Fix. More interesting, if you read their IPO submission, they mention the word data science around 36 times. And they actually have 75 data scientists on staff creating the algorithms that provide the recommendation that then the stylists are telling you. And massaging that, applying some common sense, talking to you, understanding your needs, and so on. So this is a perfect example of a company that's utilizing both. It's utilizing the human connection and the stylist to provide that extra level of personalization and understanding of the human connection, and utilizing algorithms to help out with the process of recommended. So the recommendation is not simply based on gut and instinct, but rather based on information and data and insights, right? The other dynamic that I want to talk about is the policy implications, because this is going to redefine the source of sales value. If we are able to automate a lot of tasks, then what do we do with the people that had those jobs? And even though there's going to be a lot of jobs created, there might be an imbalance because some people are out of a job and may or may not have the training for a new job. So my claim on that is that there should be public policies to help with this type of transition and to mitigate the social impact. One thing that is fairly controversial, it's around universal income and negative tax. But it is still going to be a premium on entrepreneurship. We don't expect to have a computer starting a new company anytime soon. So if you want to be in entrepreneurship, it's a great place to be, and you'll have plenty of help to do that. So as I mentioned before, the idea of the universal income is very controversial, and I'm not so sure that I'm sold into that. The idea of a negative income tax, that might be a little bit more palatable. It might have less cost, and we could do it with means tested, so there are some conditions upon which you receive that help. All right, I want to shift gears away from artificial intelligence and into what I call social physics. And what you see over there is a result of a study that was done by Alex Penland, who was my professor. And in essence, what this study was trying to do is it was trying to identify the flow of ideas and how that flow of ideas was changing the behavior of people within an organization. And in particular, what the research shows is that there are two main dynamics in terms of idea flow. One is an engagement dynamic, which is the level of interconnection and interaction within a particular group. And this dynamic, the engagement dynamic, is the #1 predictor of productivity of a team, of a company, of a country, etc. On the other hand, there's a second dynamic that you will see there on the top right part of the chart, which is the exploration dynamic. So that dynamic is a predictor of innovation. What we identify with research is that the process of interacting with the diverse groups of people that are outside of the realm of your core groups helps you bring new ideas into the group, into the team, into the company, and allows you to survive. So companies would want to see both engagement and innovation. And the reason why this is particularly important is because this model can be applied to pretty much model any human behavior. Even accounting for any other dynamics, these two dynamics help you predict GDP in a particular neighborhood, success of a company, success in a team, and so on. Only these two dynamics. So it's pretty basic, but very powerful. And you would say, okay, Damian, but if engagement and exploration are so important, why don't we have more of those ones? More is good, right? Yeah, more is good, but to a certain degree. You start reaching a point where more is not good because you run into bubbles and hurts and so on. And the problem with this is that, in essence, the first what we identify as the first bubble, financial bubble, was in 1907. And that bubble took 2 years from the moment where we triggered the bubble until where it actually burst. And the interesting thing is that over the last few years, you see bubbles being created and exploding much faster. So we see an increase in the velocity of these herd behaviors and bubbles. So in some cases, this is also triggered by algorithm trading and so on, right? And what I want to talk about is what are the implications of this, right, from a personal perspective. So I just described that we learned that interaction, the engagement and exploration are 2 key predictors of success. So from a personal perspective, you need to make sure that you increase your engagement with people. So say hi to the person that you have next door, right next to each other. What we see in research is that in-person exchanges are orders of magnitude more important than online exchanges. So yes, email is cool. Yes, social media is cool. Yes, text message is cool. Orders of magnitude more important to understand the end result in terms of productivity of a team or a person or a company is that in-person connection. So turn around, get to know the person that you have right next to you, and get to learn about them. It is fundamentally different than just simply going online and adding a comment on social media. The other thing is around increasing the exploration. And what I mean by that is you can increase a lot the engagement, but then if you don't have any new ideas coming into your group, into your team, into your company, and so on, you're pretty much blind to what's going on in the rest of the world. And so you need to force yourself to go out and meet different people. And I'm not suggesting that you go out to the street and meet any random person over there. But what I'm trying to say is that you need to force yourself out of your comfort zone. Don't just stay with the group that you're all the time. Try to sign up for an extra class, learn something new, expose yourself to a group of people that are outside of the university into something completely different. You would see how much more rich is your life, and you would see an impact on your life and your productivity and so on. One interesting example of the application of this research is a company called Ginger.io. And this was a spin-off of the lab that worked on the research that I mentioned. And in essence, this is an app. You see the issue that there's an app for everything? Okay, there's an app for this. So what this app is a healthcare app. This app, you configure it in your phone, and the app is actually tracking your phone calls, your text messages, and so on. Not the specific content on it, but the frequency and the timing and so on. And what the app does, what the algorithm is doing, is creating a baseline of your interactions and identifying what is the baseline for your interactions with everyone that you know of, right? Why is this relevant? This is relevant because this is a key predictor of when somebody is going to have a healthcare problem. And in particular, this app is focused on mental health. They are able to predict 3 days before a mental health problem happens. This has tremendous implications, because if you can intervene 3 days before, you save the cost of having to go to a clinical facility, and you save the pain of that intervention. And the interesting thing is that this company has already been working with 40 healthcare organizations, and it's already in place in 1 million customers. So this is something that has been working and has been proven. I also want to talk about the professional implications. We talked about the engagement and we talked about the exploration, but I want to introduce two other dynamics that we have learned about ourselves. One is that we have learned that we have biases. I was honored to be invited to the lecture, and as I received the list of people that have priorly given this lecture in the past, the second person that has given this lecture several decades ago was Lester Thurop, who was my professor of macroeconomics over 10 years ago. And that school of economics, and nothing bad to say about Lester, he's a genius, he was a genius economist, but we assume in many of the academic literature that humans were perfectly rational. If you guys remember when you went through economics, we assumed that people were trying to maximize their benefit all the time and they would have a perfectly rational behavior. A different school of thought in the 70s and 80s came back from Kahneman and Tversky that basically dispelled the notion that we're purely rational and introduced the concept that we're not completely rational. Not only that, you can predict the way in which we're not rational. And that has tremendous implications in multiple ways. And I'll talk about some in a couple of slides. I'll talk about a particular example of how to use this type of biases on your benefit. But from a personal perspective, you have to understand the type of problems that you have in your decision process. Unless you understand that, you will continue making the same mistakes. And that affects you at the personal level and at the professional level. We have the other dynamic that I want to bring to forefront is the reality that even though we have biases as an individual and we have a lot of irrationality as an individual, when we start tapping into a crowd of people, the noise starts evening out and we're able to capture all that knowledge. So I want to talk about a particular example around that. What we see is that universities and companies are tapping into this wisdom of crowds. And I was exposed 10 years ago to a startup that what they did is they had an online system where companies could submit a problem that they were working on. And then people from all over the world would start working on those problems and they would find solutions. And what research showed, based on all that information, is that the new solutions were coming from a different field of interest. So for example, a company that was a chemical company was trying to solve a chemical issue, and then somebody from physics, somebody from another field would say, oh yeah, that looks exactly like a problem that looks like this. Let me apply this same technique to solve this issue. And that has tremendous implications from a research perspective. And we have been using this from a company perspective to tap into the wisdom of crowds. In my company in particular, we have consumer panels in 8 countries in the world that we tap into for research purposes. And we gather all that knowledge and all that information that is invaluable for us. And it's also on demand. We can do it fairly quickly and so on. Well, not so quickly because like translating from Mandarin takes a little bit of time for me, but you get the point. I also want to talk about some of the business implications of this. As I mentioned before, if there's a premium on personal interactions and diverse interactions, then you could redesign the workplace in a way that facilitates those type of interactions. You can use the wisdom of crowds to the benefit of the company, as I mentioned before, and you can use the biases that we identify in terms of the behavior of people for the advantage of the company. And what I'll show you now is a project that I worked on a few years ago. The problem, let me describe the problem that we had. So the problem that we had is I was working for an insurance company, and in many cases, people were underinsured. Obviously, as an insurance company, you cannot force people into like getting more coverage, right? Because it has a cost. And also, we were facing a situation that people were signing up for less coverage than what they needed, and we knew that. And then when they had a claim, let's say that somebody broke into their house and stole their property, they would come back to us as an insurance company, and they would be really upset because we would only pay them $10,000 back and not $30,000 back, which was the true cost of the goods that they had. And there are two problems there. One is that there is a bias that we have where we tend to underestimate the cost of replacement cost of the goods that we have, right? Yes, we bought them at the sale, but if you have to go back in the market tomorrow and buy it, you cannot wait for that sale to happen, right? Anyways, long story short, we had four options. We had $40,000, $30,000, $20,000, and $10,000 as coverage. We introduced a $50,000 option. And you have to know that the insurance market is heavily regulated. But we have already pre-approved this in 45 states, at this level of coverage. Did we want anybody to sign up for $50,000 in coverage? No. We didn't want anybody to sign up for that. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to shift people's behavior to sign up for $30,000. So we shifted from having less than 15% of people signing up for $30,000 to have over 50% of the people by simply adding a fifth option and using what we describe in the literature as anchoring, price anchoring, and the tendency to go to the middle option. All right, I guess that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to go fast the last few slides. Another interesting thing is to look at what are the policy implications of this level of knowledge that we have about ourselves and about our social systems. And one perfect example of that is when we utilize auto-enrollment, when we utilize policies that incentivize certain type of behavior. So you don't force people to sign up for a 401k, but you give them a discount on your taxes. So you try to push people, nudge people in the right direction, right? This is an example that was fascinating to me. It's a project called Data for Development, and it was done already in 2 countries, in Ivory Coast and Senegal. And essentially what they did is they pulled tons of information from from cell phones, from the statistics agency in each of the countries and so on, and they made that available for researchers. And what happens is that the researchers came in, look at all the data, and figure out things that were helpful from a public policy perspective. As a consequence, Ivory Coast was able to identify what is the best location for them to build a new electricity generator. So they put it in the right place. They don't put it like far away. That has a lot of cost and implications. They use this type of information to decide where should we put a new cell phone tower and so on. And yes, there are challenges, right? So not all of these things are purely positive. There's a lot of concerns around privacy. There's a lot of concerns about using all of these techniques for manipulation, either from companies or from governments. Just a pause for a second. The algorithms that I showed at the beginning, there were three key measures, three key contests that they were running. The one that won 2 of those measures was a Russian algorithm, and the one that won the other measure was a Chinese algorithm. So you see there's an enhanced interest in these type of techniques. But at the end of the day, it's not so much about the techniques, but about how you use this. You can use it for good, or you can use it for negative things. And just my last few words today. I want to leave you with the impression that for the first time, we have the knowledge about ourselves and we have the understanding about how our society works. And we have help to automate mental tasks that has huge implications for us. So, potentially, we can use this to imagine a world without war. We could use this to create a world without financial crashes. We can imagine a world where disease is detected and cured and stopped in advance. We just simply need to understand more about this and decide what we value most and what are the things that we are willing to change. And with that, I'll thank you.
That was wonderful. I want to share a few thoughts that I had as a closing address, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. We also have a little token as our appreciation for you coming down. But some of the things that struck me, Damian knows this because I've discussed these ideas with him, is I started a class called #Think over here. This is the first semester we're running it, and it's a lot to do with, it came out of conversations with people like Damian about where's the world headed and what do our students need to know to be prepared to get into that world. So everything that Damian talked about is going to affect your careers for the next 30 years. Some of the things that struck me personally was the idea of the exponential growth that technology poses for us. So sometimes we think, oh, you know, our world is not that different from our parents' world, but it is in terms of our cell phones. We can see that, right? Our parents' world was not that different from their parents' world, but our children's world, or even the world that you're stepping into with your career, is going to be vastly different from anything that you've ever seen before. So part of talks like this is to kind of get you mentally prepared for what's next. And knowing what's next helps you with multiple things. Where do you invest your money? So do you invest your money in things like big data-driven companies, artificial intelligence-driven companies? Where do you want to align your careers? You could be an accountant, you could be a finance person, you're a marketeer, but do you want to align your career with an industry that's dying, or do you want to align your career with the next level industries? So if you could think back in the early 1900s, people used to use horse and buggy a lot. And people who made horse and buggies were probably some of the biggest industries of the time. And then Ford introduced its F1T model and basically eliminated the business of horse and buggy companies. So that's one of the things that I hope our students are taking away is let's not align our careers with today's equivalent of horse and buggy companies. Let's look at the future. Some of the things that I personally love that Damian touched on, and this is something I can tell you consistently across all the friends that I have that are professional, that are at this level, they're all having the same conversation, which is the things that are going to matter for the human race, for your jobs, your careers, are things like empathy, leadership. All of us have probably taken an OB class here. I know it because I teach OB. And this tends to be one of the classes that people zone out in. Oh, this is the soft stuff, who cares? Teach me about accounting, teach me about the math and the numbers. Technical stuff will only get you so far. The empathy, the leadership is what gets you to the next level, especially in an age where artificial intelligence and robots are basically taking over any job that can be analyzed. What sets us apart as human beings are things like design, creativity, empathy, leadership, intelligence, right? So let's try to focus on those aspects. Some of the other things that I loved about your talk was this idea about it's not about what to think, but rather how to think. And I always encourage my students to think like that. College is not about spoon-feeding you what to think. It is about you developing the critical thinking capabilities of how to think. Ask any situation, there's two sides to every coin. Be able to analyze that. Be careful of what you tune into, even passively. So you're all on Facebook and social media. Don't tune into just sports or just entertainment or just the Kardashians, right? Tune into stuff that actually matters. Passively, you can learn a lot. And I can tell you that from personal experience. Tune into podcasts, tune into things like TED Talks that really get you thinking about what's next, how does that affect my career? So thank you so much for talking about that with the college. Also, I loved some of the aspects he talked about, which is thinking about, instead of being scared of AI or artificial intelligence, computers and robots are going to take over my job, think about how it can augment your job. So if you're starting a career, start to think about how that technology, you can use it to help you. I love that example of Ginger.io, am I saying that right? Ginger.io, the company that basically predicts 3 days ahead of time when you're going to have a mental breakdown. It reminds me of Minority Report. You know, we're already in that age where in Minority, if you guys have seen Minority Report, before the murder even happens, the suspect has been arrested. That's the world, honestly, that we're entering. And so how do you, again, align yourself with those careers, build your careers in those fields is something that I would strongly encourage you guys to think about. The other thing that I loved about what you said was the ideas of like crowdsourcing of ideas. So individually we might be flawed, we might get into our bubbles and might think in ways that are not productive. But when we actually look at crowd wisdom, it usually does even out some of the kinks in our own flawed thinking, right? And so one of the things I was reading, and I believe I've shared this with Damian in the past as well, is can anybody guess what's the #1 company or brand in America for cars right now? Say it out loud. Louder. Any #1 brand for cars in America right now? Tesla. Tesla. It's not anything in Detroit. It's not Ford, GM, Chrysler, what you know. Think about what Damian said. Crowdsourcing is leading to all of these different fields that normally wouldn't interact with each other, like chemical engineers with technology people, and that interdisciplinary nature is what's leading to our next level industries. Tesla is a great example of that. The next level of cars in the US are not going to come from Detroit. They're going to come from Silicon Valley. They're technology, not just automotives. So again, be thinking always about how can technology affect my careers, augment it, where do I invest my money, and what is the future I'm stepping into? Because I can guarantee you it's very different from the future that your parents have had. One last thing, he's talked about explore, which is this idea of like how do we get new ideas? Companies really want you to explore. And unfortunately, sometimes with our Facebook and our social media, the algorithms are such, and Damian's touched on that, where we get into this bubble and we only hear our own thoughts and views reflected back to us. And we don't really explore outside of that. I read a very interesting article recently about a guy who discovered how Facebook was only exposing him to events that Facebook thought he would be interested in. And it was creating this bubble mentality for him. So to break out of that bubble mentality, he wrote an algorithm to overcome the algorithm and chose events randomly that popped up in his town that he would have normally not gone to. So think about that. How do you get out of your comfort zone? We have some suggestions. You guys know that we do study abroad, and we've talked about that during International Week. Please don't think of that as just one other thing and can I afford it or not. This is an amazing opportunity for you guys to actually explore what else is out there. Break out of your comfort zone. Don't be comfortable with just, I was born and raised here, I'm never going to leave here. The world's going to change even if you don't leave here. So challenge yourself to explore. The other opportunity that you guys have in front of you is this idea of interacting with people that are different than you. Unfortunately, in my classrooms, I see segregation, unfortunately, in my classrooms, where all the Caribbean students get together and all the white students from Dallas get together and all the white students from Wichita Falls get together. Break out of that mentality. It is not helping you, because when you start to explore, when you start to make friends, try to be in a team with people that are entirely different from you, you're going to start to create that mentality of how to think rather than just what to think. Right? Become that critical thinker. With that, I really want to thank Damian. It was an amazing lecture, very approachable. Thank you guys for listening to him. As Dr. Stambach said, we have some prizes for the best questions, and yes, I'll be deciding whose questions are great. So please go ahead, raise your hands, take your opportunity, take your shot. Let's ask Damian some quick questions. Preston.
In your opinion, whenever artificial intelligence goes about taking most to all of the jobs in the world, what would a universal basic income look like if you were planning behind it?
First of all, I don't think that the artificial intelligence will ever take all the jobs, but more that it's disrupting existing jobs and they are becoming something different, right? So I don't think that we're going to reach a point where there's no jobs whatsoever. I do think that there's going to be a tons of disruption and potentially quite a bit of job loss in certain groups of issues. Your question around universal income, I'm not a big fan of universal income. I felt obliged to mention it in my talk because it's something that is hot right now, and it's a public policy idea that has been growing over the last few years. I'm a much bigger fan of smarter more complicated ways of solving this type of problem.
Yes, ma'am. Hannah.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming. And we all very much appreciate that you take your time to come and talk to us. And my question is, so we talked a lot about the combination of human relations and technology. And how, at Fossil, as a leader, do you ensure that there is this balance between task and relationship-oriented work?
Yeah, excellent question. So I run the team that does data science, and all of my team were data nerds, and we're focused on applied mathematics and so on. Having said that, the last year we brought Dr. Kataria to do a training on emotional intelligence, precisely because we identified that the key for our success was to be able to influence the behavior of other people. And as such, we need to be more self-aware, be able to have more self-control, and we need to be better at understanding social dynamics and influencing those social dynamics. I just came back a few days ago from a trip that I did literally around the world. So I was in New York, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Munich, Basel. And the reason why I did that is because we had our key offices in other countries, and there's no substitute for that in-person connection. So I had 8 hours of back-to-back presentations where I went through all of the key work and key insights that my team is producing, so we can educate other business partners on what's going on and the insights that we have. And the reason why I did that, and honestly it was a bit tiring to be bluntly honest, is that we sent emails with that information, but we identified that the information was not sinking in. They were not absorbing the information, and the behaviors were not changing. So I consider that a key part of my job is to influence the behavior of other people from the company. So the success of me and my team is the minute that we can influence a particular person to change the way that they are making decisions and base those decisions on insights. And that doesn't happen unless you have that personal connection.
Great question. Yes, sir, in the back. Could you give us your name, please?
Richard. And so you mentioned the loss of jobs. How would the private sector sort of mitigate like the loss of jobs? And so in terms of educating like the lower skilled workers, and so that way they're not just out of a job and with no other skills or trades that help them be successful just outside of their own previous field.
I don't think that the private companies have a good track record of retraining people. Normally that has to happen through a public policy solution. The focus of the private companies is in maximizing shareholder value, so if they can automate something and reduce the cost, they would do it, and they will most likely not do anything to retrain people. There might be a few exceptions here and there, but I think that there has to be a public policy solution to that problem.
Great. Yes, sir. Luca.
Yes, hello. I'm Luca, and for me the most striking part of the lecture was probably that he said that through automation, human capital is still going to be relevant, just that the emotional intelligence part is more significant. So my question is, if you could go back now, would you actually study something different, and perhaps for us as business students, how would you like the business curriculum to change as to be more compatible with the future?
So I think that your question was around if I were to go back, would I study something different? Short answer, no. I like what I do. But on building on that, what I want to mention is that there's not just simply one way of being successful in the future, which is around just like building code and doing applied mathematics and so on. Yes, those jobs are going to be there, and there's more and more. And I had an opening in my team for the last year that I've been unable to fill in 1 year. So yes, there's a need for that. Having said that, I believe fundamentally that you're going to see a lot of other opportunities popping up due to these type of technologies across multiple things. So if you're in business and you care about entrepreneurship, get into entrepreneurship. I mean, there's no knowledge or not understanding that we're going to see a artificial intelligence system starting new companies anytime soon. So.
If I could build off of that, Luca and I have also had one-on-one conversations about this. He's in economics, and to Damian's point, get into behavioral economics, because economics is leaving that idea that we have a rational human being behind and getting more into that merger of OB and economics, if you will, which is behavioral economics. So that's your next level for your career. Great question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Courtney, and my interest is kind of in terms of marketing, and we're still kind of in this transitional phase of a generation who is accustomed to technology and a generation who is unaccustomed to technology. And so my question is, how do you still attain to the market that is unaccustomed to technology, and when do you feel that gap will finally be closed?
Yeah, so I want to push your question a little bit further. So you talk about the generations and so on. The beauty of this type of technologies is that you can do hyper-personalization, which for a very low cost. What I mean by that is that right now we have technologies that are in place where we can provide what I would describe as a very customized, personalized type of messaging that tailors to your specific needs in a way that is extremely cost effective. While before it was very expensive to do that, right now we have automation in place, so we speak to people that are, to your point, less likely to be prone to care about technology in a different way that we speak to people that are more likely to be interested in technology. So all these technologies are already affecting the execution in marketing. And I think that there's something further around that in marketing in particular we see what I would describe as more old school marketing people that tend to come from an era where instinct, decision-based making was the norm, and we're shifting slowly towards a more insights-based, consumer-driven decision-making. That dynamic is happening within the company too. Yeah.
Great question. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you very much for speaking today. And I have a few prompt questions. In your opinion, which will have a greater impact on the effectiveness of machine learning and artificial intelligence? The data sets available to train algorithms, or the effects of statistical or machine learning techniques and technology? And then secondly, how important is the democratization of the data? For instance, an algorithm that would use salary data that may reinforce like a gender wage gap or something like that?
I think he earned one, so.
Let me start with the last part of your question. So, the professor that I mentioned that I work with, that did that social physics research, he has a lot of proposals around ownership of the data going back to the final consumer. And what I mean by that is that right now, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, they're amassing a lot of data ourselves. And they own that data, right? And we don't own it, pretty much. And so what he's proposing is to give back the ownership of the data back to the person that generated that data. So you can trade with that, and you can say, okay, you want my data? There's a specific fee for that. And interestingly enough, the European Union is moving with a new regulation in that direction already. Not completely there, but like going in that same direction where there's a lot more ownership of the data on the customer side and so on. Your first question was, if I understand correctly, you were saying that what is more important, the artificial intelligence algorithms or the data piece? Is that your question?
Yeah, like will data, the aggregate amount of data available to train algorithms or new technology
It's a combination of both. I'll tell you a little secret. I wrote an article in 1994 about artificial intelligence, and in that article I already identified that the key reason why artificial intelligence was not moving forward was because they didn't have access to experiential data. Humans, we learn through experience, so we stumble and fall. We bump into things, we do things, we interact with the world and with other people. We're social beings, and we learn through that experience. In the case of algorithms, that didn't exist. The key difference now is that we're getting to a point where a lot of that experience is digitalized, so algorithms can actually learn from that.
And algorithms also learn from each other, right? So Google's algorithms is basically talking to each other and creating child code, so there's that. Okay, yes sir.
How would we learn how to relearn? Like, where would we start doing that? And then what are like books or podcasts you would recommend to learn further from?
It's a good question, but a difficult question to answer. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, I think that you need to do exercises or classes or activities that push you in the direction of understanding, of developing the right way of thinking about the problem, right? So you need to be able to identify what's the problem, identify what are the right questions to be asking, and quickly move forward with an idea around that. The thing that comes to mind is the Montessori style of school in pre-K or in primary school, where people are just pushed there and there's like no structure and you just learn from each other and so on. I'm not saying that you go back to school in that way, but that idea comes to mind. Your second question around books or podcasts, I love Predictably Rational from Dan Ariely, and Dan was a professor of mine when I was at MIT. I love Thinking Fast and Slow from Kahneman, although it's a little dry, to be honest. I like Social Physics from Alex Perna, who was also my professor at MIT. Those are the books that I would recommend. Podcasts, there are so many good ones. It's hard to pick one.
Pick three.
We'll take that offline afterwards.
Planet Fund, Economics, TED Radio Hour. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about like algorithms being able to calculate different things. Use the Facebook example where it was showing him events that only he would like, as opposed to events that were going on in this area that he might be interested in that he normally wouldn't be interested in. At what point do you think that an algorithm would become more predictive of like human personality in that sense that we sometimes branch out and do things completely different from what we're used to? Like with Ginger.io, being able to predict a mental breakdown, like how far could we take it to where they'd be able to predict ways around, that inevitable mental breakdown in a 3-day scenario? How could they suggest, kind of branching out to a more personality perspective?
I'm not sure that I understood your question, but let me take a stab at it. So one thing that you said at the beginning is around the influence that algorithms are having on our lives. And I think that it's very important for us to realize that the dynamic that I mentioned, where companies are using this type of algorithms to expose people to a personalized content, it has a dark side. So the positive side is that, in theory, we're getting exposed to things that are more interesting to us. The dark side of it is that you get into this loop, information loop, where you are inside a bubble and only certain things are being exposed to you. So the key here that we need to recognize is that algorithms are not purely objective and are not just clean and have no consequences. Algorithms have biases. We have seen many situations where algorithms starts discriminating or things like that. So you have to be very careful in the application of this type of automation, so you don't reproduce a behavior that you don't want, right? So, and I think that we have to become more conscious of that to combat that ourselves at a personal level, from a company perspective. I worked with Facebook several years ago because they have issues with tagging inappropriate content, and they develop a bunch of algorithms, but they're still not good enough. So they have an army of people working with the algorithm, trying to figure out what is inappropriate content and so on, and they still haven't invested a large enough sum of money, in my humble opinion.
I guess I kind of have a second question to that. At what point do you think the intelligence develops more into a personality than just a product of data?
Can I add to that? Are you asking when does AI become more human?
Yes. When does it become more empathetic, more predictive by itself rather than just the data that's already present?
I'm going to push your question a little bit further. So there's something that we call the singularity, which is the point where AI becomes self-conscious. We're not there yet. We're not even remotely close to that. Having said that, as I mentioned in the talk, a lot of times we thought that we were not there, and it like suddenly happened, right? So we see this like slow, and then like something happens. Right now, what we have at the end of the day are expert systems. They are very good in a very narrow field. So you take IBM Watson capability to play Jeopardy, and it's great at playing Jeopardy, but you have to retrain it if you wanted to play chess, or if you wanted to identify, doing X-rays diagnosis and so on, right? So right now we have things that are very, very narrow and very individualistic.
I'm sure you guys have lots of really good questions, and this is one of the reasons I'm going to encourage that you join Delta Sigma Pi, because I have to escort Damian off to a 15-minute Q&A session with only Delta Sigma Pi members. So great plug. If you are interested in one-on-one session, you should join our premier business fraternity that makes you a better business professional, gets you to network with people like him. With that, can we have one last round of applause for Mr. Sincere thanks.
Thank you. This is awesome.
In real time, huh?